Welcome, everyone. My name is Bob Kefchin. I'm MASSP's Director of Government Relations. And welcome to today's Leader2Leader session, where we're going to be talking about pupil accounting rules. Especially going into this next school year, we know that figuring out ways to manage pupil accounting are going to be challenging for a lot of folks in the state. As you're logging in, please make sure to take just a minute and introduce yourself in the chat and share one thing you hope to take away from today's session. Please, when you do your chat, make sure you've set the chat to send to all panelists and attendees so everybody on the session can see what you're sharing today. My name is Bob Kefchin. As I said, I'm MASSP's Director of Government Relations. Also on today, we have Colin Rister, our Executive Director, Wendy Zadeb, Ryan Casey, handling our tech, and our special guest today, Rob Dickenson, the Executive Director of the Michigan Pupil Accounting and Auditing Association. Just so you guys know, as we're getting into this, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted after. We will also share a copy of the slide deck with you when we share the recording. As is always the case with these Leader2Leader sessions, the information we're presenting is based on the most up-to-date information we have as of today, as of the time that we're sharing this information. As information is coming out, as new things come along, note that there may be new things that come out after this presentation. So we're doing our best to keep it up to date, and we'll keep you up to date as things move forward. But this is what we have to this point. We will be using the Q&A feature for questions for today's session. So you'll see the little button along the bottom that says Q&A. If you have questions during the session, please post those into the question and answer section, and we will moderate from there to get your questions. Use the chat for introducing yourself, for comments along the way, for sharing links or other information. But if you do have a question, please make sure to put it in the Q&A. And just to repeat, a copy of the slide deck from today's presentation and a recording of the presentation will be emailed out and made available in Monday's headlines to everybody that joins us. So with that, the reason we are here today, and I'm going to jump right into it, is that we're talking about pupil accounting. And the reason that we wanted to do this session on pupil accounting is because we know that we're going to need to move beyond traditional attendance for next year. Up to this point, pupil accounting for most students in most schools and most programs has been relatively straightforward. The pupil is in your building or in your classroom. At the beginning of the class period, you take attendance, everybody raises their hands or says here, and you're done, right? That's most pupil accounting. But for next year, especially as we're looking at split schedules, increased virtual learning, and other challenges posed by remote learning during the pandemic, we're having to look at other options. And many of those already exist in the pupil accounting manual. Things like virtual learning, distance learning, seat time waivers, dual enrollment, all have different pupil accounting rules, some of which you may be familiar with, some of which you may not. In our session today, we're going to be focusing primarily on these top 5. And the reason we chose these 5 to focus on is because based on our conversations and in looking into the pupil accounting manual, we felt like these 5 options were most likely to be the ones useful to you as you were trying to find ways to account for pupils during a phase 1 through 3 remote learning situation, or even a phase 4 where you're doing a split schedule or something like that. The other 3, while they are still out there and they are still things you're going to potentially want to use, they didn't have as good of a fit for pupil accounting during pandemic, which is really what we're focusing on today. So we're going to be talking a lot about the pupil accounting manual, and I love talking about the pupil accounting manual. I love the cover on the pupil accounting manual, especially because every time we talk about pupil accounting, I feel like that guy. We're right there. And it's dense, it's difficult material, it's very technical. Fortunately, we have Rob Dickenson, our expert, with us today to help us parse through all of this, and not just me, because I am definitely deer in headlights when it comes to some of this thing. So why are we talking pupil accounting? Why are we focusing on this? Because for next year, you need a plan for how you're going to count 180 days, or how you're going to provide 1,098 hours for how you're going to take daily attendance, for how you're going to handle count days, your October count and your February count. These things used to be givens, and they were pretty straightforward, and they're no longer givens in the current situation. And the reason to understand the current rules is because you may have to live under them. Waiting for the Michigan legislature is kind of a toss of the dice at this point. So expecting that they're going to waive days and hours or fix your specific problems or the challenges you're facing in your district, I would tell you at this point, may be overly optimistic. I think you have to plan to try and operate under the current rules. As we present all of these things, and we're going to be talking about several different options, I do want to frame this by explaining that the Pupil Accounting Manual is not a pandemic accounting manual. So this is kind of square peg round hole. We're talking about virtual learning. We're talking about distance learning. These rules, these Pupil accounting procedures were not set up to handle remote learning during pandemic. They weren't designed for that. They are the best we have, but they haven't really been tested extensively during a remote learning situation either. So you're probably going to have to pull together several solutions and several approaches to make sure that you've covered the bases for all your pupils, which is why it's so important to understand the nuances of the things we're going to be talking about today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob and let him get into the nitty-gritty details.
Okay, thanks. Before we get started, a few words of warning. As Bob mentioned earlier in the session, these are the rules that exist as of right now. It's possible that there will be legislative changes or administrative rule change that may provide some relief. Hopefully it's relief. But hopefully, if you're able to set up a system that can follow these rules, you'll be good to go no matter what. One thing to keep in mind as we're talking about this today is that pupil accounting rules are interpreted by people, by pupil accountants, by auditors, and they differ from place to place around the state. So it's important that as you're looking at making plans, as you're trying to figure out how to document the things we're going to be talking about this morning, make sure you do your best to try and share that with your pupil accountant in your district and your ISD auditor before the year starts. Give them an opportunity to try and react to what you're doing, make suggestions on documents, things like that. The more warning, not warning, but the more ahead of the game you can give them a heads up before the school year starts, the better off you're going to be. Surprising your auditor is almost never a good idea during your pupil accounting audit. Okay, I want to start off with some definitions of the items that Bob introduced for you earlier, and then we'll go through each one of them in a little bit more detail later on. Starting with virtual learning. These are courses taken through a digital learning environment using software that's specifically designed to provide educational content to students. So things like Michigan Virtual, Genesee ISD system, etc. So this is different than just using a computer to look up things on the internet. Typically, this is mostly asynchronous, meaning that the teachers and the students are not conversing during this process. It'll include an online it includes the online portion of blended learning. There's been a lot of terms thrown out this summer: blended learning, hybrid learning. They're all really the same thing, and that is part of the student's time is being spent with a traditional button seat classroom. Part of the student's time is being spent in a virtual learning environment where they're learning online, whether that be in a classroom in your building or whether that's at home or some other location during the day, during the evening, weekends, whatever the case may be. So that's really what virtual learning is, and we'll get more into the details in a few minutes. Next up is distance learning. This is different than virtual learning. Those of you that may have been around education long enough to remember the old ITV system. This is a synchronous learning that occurs on a regularly scheduled basis that uses some sort of technology, whether it's a camera and a television, whether it's Skype or Zoom like we're using right now, or something else like that that allows a teacher to have a regularly scheduled class with students who may not be in front of them in the same room. So whether they're in a different building like the old ITV system, or whether they are all at home and they're all logging in at 8:30 every morning to take their algebra class, that's what distance learning is. Independent study is a self-directed learning experience. It has some limitations that are going to prevent it being used everywhere. But this is where students are using the internet as a resource, but not a student who they may be using it as a resource, but it's not taking a dedicated online course. That's virtual learning. It's an important distinction. Next up is seat time waivers. This phrase gets used a lot, and in truth, you probably won't use it very often. This is a waiver for students using, typically doing project-based learning outside of the current classroom day. It's offline learning, it's not online, and it doesn't really lower the hours learning, so it isn't really something that'll be used very often. However, what you may well want to be looking at are days and hours waivers. These are waivers that, again, just like the seat time waivers, have to be approved by the department, that allows you to provide fewer days and hours for students in a traditional classroom setting. So that makes it different than a seat time waiver. You can, according to the department, waive up to 80% of the days and hours requirements. Currently, you're required 180 days and 1,098 hours. You can waive up to 80% of that and go down as low as 36 days and 219.6 hours if you can justify the educational purpose of that in your waiver application.
And Andrew, to your question, are these definitions of our definitions or those from the Pupil Accounting Manual? They're the definitions from the Pupil Accounting Manual, right, Rob?
Yes.
We put them in our own words, but these are Pupil Accounting Manual definitions. So, quick poll. Ryan's going to throw up a quick poll for us. Looking ahead, now that we have some common understanding and common terms that we're working from, looking ahead at the fall, which of these flexible learning options do you anticipate using in the fall for your students and staff as part of your preparedness plan?
And remember, you can choose all that apply here, so you can select multiple options. 50% of the vote is in. Give them about 10 more seconds. And okay, we will stop and share the results out.
All right, so unsurprisingly, I think a lot of folks are looking at virtual learning for next fall. That doesn't surprise me at all. Distance learning, so synchronous distance learning is our second most popular, with a lot of folks looking at days and hours waivers, or dual enrollment even as a possibility for accounting for the fall. Thank you for participating in the poll. These results are really helpful, not just for your information, but also for us as we're looking ahead at what else to focus on for future Leader2Leader sessions. So thank you. All right. So Rob, let's dig deep on virtual learning. That's by far the thing that folks are planning on using the most. Let's make sure we've got a good, solid understanding of what that looks like.
Fair enough. Okay. Virtual learning, this is when a student takes an online course, whether it's at Michigan Virtual University, whether it's at one of the other, there are software providers, there are ISD-based programs. You may develop your own virtual program. It can also be when a student is in blended learning. Blended learning is simply combining virtual learning with some traditional button seat classroom time. So you want to keep in mind that there's lots of ways to mix and match these different pieces. So for instance, in a blended learning situation, you might decide that because COVID has flared up and you can't use but-in-seat class time for the in-person portion of a blended course, You may decide to go with distance learning and use Skype or Zoom or something like that to provide the in-person instruction for a blended learning class. When you mix those types of modes together, you need to follow the rules for both modes, and that's what makes this complex and why most of your pupil accountants regularly pull their hair out. So this is something that you're going to want to talk through with them as you're trying to set up these plans. We're going to account for most of these things in separate items in just a moment. Two of these that I want to pull out here because we won't be talking about them further. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about every rule that's surrounding virtual learning. It's pages and pages in the manual. We could spend the whole afternoon on it and still not complete it. But a couple of things to be aware of. The Student's Educational Development Plan, the EDP, regardless of what grade you're talking about, even elementary students, if the student is going to take more than 2 virtual courses under the current rules, you need to have an EDP for that student, even if they're a 3rd grader and you're doing virtual learning for them. So that is going to be an issue if that is not something that is relieved somehow by the department or the legislature. Also, parent permission, again, in the current rules, a student who takes virtual learning has to have permission from their parents, and the district has to maintain that permission in their files. But as Bob mentioned earlier, that was a rule designed around virtual learning being something limited, not every single student in the district. So again, while that hopefully may be something we may see some relief on, as of right now, it is a rule that is in the system. Okay, teacher of record, and we're going to cover this a few times during the session because it's something worth keeping in mind. The teacher of record that we're talking about during this session needs to be somebody certified in both the grade level and the subject area of the course they're teaching, or they have to be permitted or authorized or approved by the Department of Education. There could be subs. There's a number of ways you can get people permitted and authorized by the Department of Education, but it's important that they have that certification or that permit before the count day. They have to be employed by your district. They have to be available to the students for questions and help. Keep in mind that if your provider is a community college or for a dual enrollment, then your instructor is employed or contracted through the community college. Also, those of you that may be working at charter schools, you don't have to directly employ the person. They can be part of the management group or contracted as well. So, when you're looking at teachers of record for virtual classes, there are basically 2 categories of them. If the course is provided through the statewide catalog through Michigan Virtual, then Michigan Virtual will provide you the PIC code, that's the personnel identification code, of the teacher of record, and you're required to put that teacher's name into your system as the teacher of that course, and when you ultimately do the reporting to SEPI at the end of the year, won't go into, you'll be submitting that teacher's PIC. So Michigan Virtual will provide you the official teacher for that course. Any other third-party provider, as of right now, you're required to provide the teacher of record. You may not use theirs even if they have one for you. That may change, we don't know, but as of right now, any third-party provider who isn't Michigan Virtual, you still have to provide a certified teacher of record for that course. If you design your own virtual course, then the person you have teaching the course is going to be the teacher of record.
Rob, we have a question. What about if somebody's doing regional virtual learning? Can the teacher of record be employed by another school district, a teacher at another school district providing a virtual course for students in your district?
That's why I was saying as of right now, that's not allowed. It is possible that will change. There are some ISDs that are pulling together regional programs, and those programs may be approved to allow those teachers to be used, but as of today and as of this afternoon, I've not heard anything that would allow that exception yet. Okay, beyond a teacher of record, you also need a mentor. A mentor is someone who is an employee of the district, does not necessarily need to be a certified teacher, but can be. This is a person who monitors the pupil's progress, makes sure they have access to the needed technology, helps the student interact with the computer and get to the things they need for their learning courses, and ensures that the students have access to the teacher of record. This is really thought of primarily up to now. The mentor has been thought of more in the classroom setting. You have a lab going on third hour and students are in there taking their particular courses, and there's an individual in there who may or may not be a teacher, but they're helping the students with the technology, getting them online, answering any questions they may have about the technology and getting into the system. That person is meeting the mentor's needs. They don't need to be certified, but they can be. And if they are certified and it's in a classroom setting where the teacher is together with the students, then attendance could be taken if that teacher wishes to. But keep in mind, there needs to be, somebody needs to provide the functions of the mentor, somebody needs to provide the functions of the teacher of record. They can be the same person, that's okay. So if you're talking about a fully virtual class that never has a classroom setting where they're never sitting in a lab working, they're just working from home or something like that, the teacher may be providing that same level of assistance to the students that the mentor does. And in that case, then the teacher of record is filling the mentor's role.
Rob, a question from Stephanie. She said, in the past, we've been given the guidance for computer-based virtual courses from Edgenuity that the teacher of record only has to have grade level certification, not subject area certification. Are you saying that we need to make sure that we have a teacher of record who also has subject area certification?
This is one of those things that certainly changes in different parts of the state. It also changes depending on who you ask, including sometimes, unfortunately, when you ask folks at the Department of Education. What I can tell you is the most restrictive answer I have heard so far is that if the teacher of record is not subject level certified, let's say that this is a classroom setting where kids are sitting in the lab and they are taking whatever course they need to take. So one student is teaching math next to them, somebody's in social studies, student next to them is in physics, etc. You have a teacher there performing the mentor functions of that classroom. That teacher's not certified in everything they're going to teach. The way that it's currently being talked about, the most certain way to make sure that you get your FTE for it and is going to be accepted virtually anywhere is by having a second teacher who is subject level certified also tied to that student's course, the individual physics class or social studies or math class that they're taking, and that subject level certified teacher of record is available to that student either through email, texting, phone calls, stopping by for office hours, whatever the case may be. So long as that student has access to someone who is subject level certified, most ISDs are going to accept that just fine. Some may accept only grade level certified and not subject level, some won't. So unfortunately, until we get definitions more cleared up for next year, that's the best I can answer that particular question.
Hey, Rob, I appreciate your clarification. And as you were explaining that, one thing that you referenced that's a frequent frustration I hear from principals statewide is that they might learn about a flexible learning opportunity and employ it in their district, and they had no problem with the pupil accounting person, their colleague didn't, and then in their county or ISD, they won't accept that exact same program. So why do those inconsistencies occur? What's happening that causes that?
Auditors are people, and some of them hear about things sooner than others. Some of them may take preconceived notions into programs that others may not. It's just, unfortunately, if you start reading through the pupil accounting manual, if you can stay awake past section 2, you've got a really good start going. But if you go through the whole thing, one of the things you're going to realize is that the number of rules is absolutely enormous. And trying to promulgate an exact set of rules that cover every possible situation for every possible student in a state of 1.6 million kids simply isn't possible. Auditors are always going to have to interpret the rules to some level. At the Pupil Accounting Association, we have regular meetings of auditors. In fact, we've got one coming up next week. And one of our goals is always to promote auditor consistency. Hey, can we all agree this is how you handle this situation? The problem is the state can generate situations much, much faster than we can talk them through. So there's always going to be that level of things may be different here than they are there. It's not that anyone is trying to make things harder on anyone else. It's just we're all people and we all learn and things as they come around, and not everybody has access to everything at the same time.
Thank you. That's a fair answer. I appreciate your sense of humor about it too.
Okay. While there are a number of record-keeping rules around virtual learning, and I am not going to touch on every one of them today, but be aware there are other rules beyond what I've talked about. The two big ones that you need to worry about are the attendance rules, or in the case of virtual learning, it's not really called attendance, it's called certifying participation. And there's two ways you can do that, through two-way interaction and count day participation. We're going to talk about each one of them. Bob and I sat together for a good amount of time yesterday trying to figure out how to make a clear, concise statement of what two-way interaction is for a bullet like this, and we both agree that we failed at that. It's just something that's very hard to try and concisely communicate in writing. Interaction is a teacher or a mentor and a student talking to each other back and forth. It's back and forth is the key there. It can be the mentor or the teacher, but it has to involve the student, and there has to be communication in both directions. An email that I, as the teacher, send the student, hey, how's it been going? How did you do on that quiz? The student coming back saying, yeah, I really struggled on question 3. Is there anywhere I can go for more information, etc.? That would be a valid two-way communication. Mass emails, however, in and of themselves do not count as two-way communication. So if the teacher on a Wednesday morning, because Wednesday morning is the day he's paying attention to his particular algebra class, sends a mass email out to every student enrolled in it saying, hey guys, how's it going today? And he gets individual answers back. That mass email does not count as one of the conversations. Now, as long as the student responds back and the teacher then gets involved with the student in a conversation, so there is multiple conversations back and forth, at least 2 of them, then that's fine. There's nothing saying you can't use a mass email, but you cannot count it as one of the 2 communications with each other. These can be emails, they can be text messages, phone calls, you can do it in person if you want to, but based on each one, there will be some requirement for logging and documenting that particular conversation. That's one that may vary in different places, and it certainly is going to vary based on your student information system, your online system that you may be using, your virtual learning tools that may have some of this built into it. So this is, again, one of those places where if you have the opportunity, and understand since the whole state is doing this, you may not have much of an opportunity this fall. If you have documents that you can share with your auditor or your pupil accountant ahead of time to give them a heads up as to what they can expect, give them an opportunity to give you any feedback on how it might be improved or something, then you're going to be that much ahead of the game. Keep in mind, two-way internet virtual learning can go as deep as kindergarten. So for students through K through 5, that two-way communication could be with the student's parent as well. That still counts if the student is in elementary grades. The communication has to be related to the course content or the student's progress. You can't just ask the student how he thinks this Friday's football game is going to come out. That's not talking about the class. If you want to get FTE, you need to document at least one of these two-way interactions per student per week for the 4 weeks after the count day. And that week normally runs from a Wednesday to the following Tuesday. So somewhere in there, you need to have documented that two-way interaction once per student. Now that's per student, not per class in this case. So a student can have a fully virtual schedule. All your auditor is going to be looking for is at least one two-way interaction with that student on one of those subjects, not necessarily on every single one. This is something that actually needs to be kept throughout the entire year. Your pupil accountant is only going to be concerned with these 4 weeks, but this is something that is a requirement of virtual learning, that these kind of logs go through the entire year.
So in other words, even if you can count the pupil in membership as an FTE based on keeping that log for 4 weeks, and that's all your pupil auditor is going to look at, Rob, state law requires that you have a full year log of two-way interactions once per week per student, right?
Correct. Okay, I said there were 2 ways to document participation. The two-way log is one of them. The second way is through count day participation. So if the two-way log is just something you can't have, one of the things you can do is on count day, there are several ways that you can show that the student participated on the count day. So you're thinking the same lines of the student in a classroom on count day, that their attendance that day is what certifies their FTE. So a student, if you have a course that is blended 50% or more of classroom time, so it may be virtual 1 or 2 days a week, but 3 days a week it's button seat, then if one of those days is the count day and you have attendance for that classroom with the teacher, then you can use that attendance. If you have the students all take a quiz or participate in a lesson or an assignment or some sort of activity that generates a document to show they completed it that day, you could use that documentation. Also, if they just access and use the system beyond just logging in, and you were able to document a record of their use of the system, then you would be able to use that to prove count day participation as well. However, the limitation here is all of those things have to occur on count day. You have a student who's absent on count day or is not feeling well that day and doesn't bother getting online, you may lose all of their virtual FTE. So your best practice here is, even if you're considering using the count day participation logs for most of your students, keep those two-way logs going anyways, because any students that are absent on count day, you've then got the two-way logs as a backup. Keep in mind, as we're going through this, that documentation, we talked about documenting attendance, documenting logins, things like that. The paperwork for that is going to change with each vendor you use. So again, and I realize that I'm harping on this, but it's an important thing to get it through, is that you always want to look at it, especially if you are adopting a new system this year than you used in the past because of the needs of the pandemic, or if you had not been virtual before, but you are now going virtual, please make sure you, if nothing else, share the name of the vendor and some of these documents with your pupil accountant and your auditor so that they know what to expect. And again, keep in mind that this is not only for September, these same rules will apply in February. And if you're thinking, well, we know we're supposed to keep the two-way log alive all year long, but nobody's going to check it any of the other months, so we'll just shut it down and then start it up again in February, you may find that not only is it required, but it might be, from a procedural standpoint, easier to keep your staff maintaining those logs if you simply have a standard that they're maintained all year long. You don't have to worry about everybody starting up and stopping at the same periods of time.
So Rob, a question that we keep getting on all of this, and I want to make sure that we're 100% on it because I think 3 different people have asked it. You said 1 two-way communication per student per week, not 1 two-way communication per student per class per week, right?
That's correct. And in fact, thank you for mentioning that, because what I didn't do was tell you the distinction for the count day participation. Because if you are going to use count day participation instead of the two-way logs, that is per class. So if you have a student in 6 virtual classes, you need to have the documentation of them being either in a classroom with attendance, if that's more than 50%, or having taken a quiz or done something online and generated that documentation for every single class they're in. That's the difference between the two-way logs and the count day participation. Thank you, Bob. I wanted to mention that and it slipped my mind.
All right. So another one we've gotten, EPs. There's no standard form for that I've ever seen. Rob, is there a standard form that people accounting auditors like to see to make sure that students have an EEP on file?
There is, for students in secondary school, the Department of Education has a sample EDP online for middle schoolers and up. It's out on their website. If you go to the MDE website and in the search bar, put in Educational Development Plan, it should take you to the link. There is currently nothing for elementaries devised from the state. One of the things that we had done as a Pupil Accounting Association is we have a library of forms that a lot of the auditors around the state are now using as part of their bank of pupil accounting forms that they turn each year. One of the things we have on our website, which is mpaaa.org, is a sample elementary EDP form. Nobody's saying it's official. There is no official form, but it's simply something that has been gone through the department, has looked at it, and they seem okay with it, that if you need a starting point for an EDP for elementary students, we can at least get you started on the process. We've got a sample out there for you. And it's
Great.
available.
We'll make sure that we share that link and that resource with folks
Sure.
when we send out the recording of this and the slide deck afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Just so folks know, we've got our references for this section up. You'll want to look at the Pupil Accounting Manual, Section 50D. The relevant state statute is MCL 388.1621F. That's the virtual learning section of the School Aid Act. And as Rob keeps emphasizing, you want to check with your ISD auditor, meaning your local ISD auditor, as you go through and try to do these different things, because interpretations on some of this vary depending on which region of the state that you're in. I do want to touch quickly, because we got a question about the current legislation being debated in the House and whether it removes any of the pupil accounting rules laid forward that Rob just laid forward. I would say two things. One, from where I sit and what I've read, I think that the House legislation, which is slated to pass the House all the way over to the Senate this week, would actually make this more rather than less complicated. Thanks, Michigan legislature. Second, I don't see any world in which the legislation as it's currently being debated actually makes it to the governor's desk and gets signed into law. So as far as the legislation currently being debated, Aaron, what I would tell you is that you're better off learning the current pupil accounting rules, because I just don't see a significant shift coming from the state legislature that has a chance to pass, at least right now. Now, a month from now, 2 months from now, as we get closer to the end of September, that may change, but that isn't going to help you for the start of school. Let's talk distance learning, Rob.
Okay, before we move on, just one quick note. One of the things to keep in mind, and again, it's going to depend on where you're at. It's not just the locals that are going to be overwhelmed. Your auditors are going to be overwhelmed as well. Now, if you're in a rural county in the upper part of the Lower Peninsula, perhaps your auditor is going to be able to handle looking over the educational development plans for every single student in that county when you all go virtual. The auditors at Oakland schools aren't going to be able to do that for every single student in Oakland County or Wayne County or Macomb County. They're going to have to make some sort of allowances for that. So again, that's why we've been emphasizing communication with the audit team, because if we don't get any legislative relief from this, auditors are going to have to make some decisions on how they're going to approach a job that nobody can really do in the amount of time they have to do it. So it's going to, and which further leads, of course, to things changing from place to place, but that's just inevitable if we don't have guidance from the top.
A couple more questions that have come in, Rob, just clarifications. Proving days and hours for students in a virtual learning environment. The two-way log, is that sufficient do you have to record specific days and hours for virtual learning pupils?
You do not. The participation requirements, the things that we just talked about, takes the place of the days and hours for the virtual students. Now, typically, the virtual students are only a portion of your students. If they all go virtual, then it changes. Then you may not have to worry about days and hours because you don't have students sitting in classrooms, period.
Cool. Let's talk distance learning.
Distance learning is different than virtual learning in that it is synchronous. And in some way, either in person or through Zoom or Skype or what have you, students and teachers are meeting regularly to have their classroom sessions. So it's some sort of live two-way communication, just like we're doing now over Skype. but the students and teachers are in two different locations. From an auditor's standpoint of view, a distance learning class is pretty much the same thing as a standard button seat class, and what they're going to want to see is that attendance is being taken by an appropriately certified teacher for that particular course. If you have that, then you're in good shape. Independent study is going to give you some limited opportunities that you may not have otherwise. In that, this is where a student does some self-directed project-based learning. They want to learn about the moon landing or something like that, and they go out and they do research, and the teacher has set them a goal of writing a report that covers this particular thing or some sort of project, something like that. The delivery method is pretty flexible. It could be hands out. You could have an outline that you provide the student and they use the internet. But keep in mind, if it is an online learning course, that's not independent study, that's virtual learning. There have been talk about mail packets and things like that. Those could fit under independent study. The problem is, Bob, let's roll to the next slide. There are limitations. We'll talk about those limitations. Teachers of record, thank you. The students in independent study can only be in grades 9 through 12, so it's not going to help you in grades lower than that. In addition, under the current rules, a student can only be in 2 courses at once in independent study. So you can't use that for the entire, the student's entire academic time in the district. The class has to be academic in nature and has to count towards graduation. So while this could be of some use to you, it's not going to be a complete answer in and of its own under the rules as they currently exist. Teacher of record in an independent study class is the exact same as others, certified in the subject and grade level. They're the ones responsible for providing instructions, and the rules don't change between these types of courses. So the same rules for who the teacher has to be. The course has to be approved in the district's course catalog. And in fact, let me expand on that a little bit. Everything we're talking about today, all the courses you're going to offer your students in your plans have to be approved by your Board of Education, and they should be included in your district's course catalog. So if you're having to create new classes in order to provide education in an innovative way because of the pandemic, you need to make sure that those courses are shared with your Board of Education and that they are properly approved by the board. And then you get them into your district's course catalog. If it's an independent study course, it has to be capable of generating credit towards a high school diploma, letting go somebody go out and study something and enjoy their time on music or something like that, but you don't give them any credit towards graduation. That's not a legitimate independent study class. The students in independent study do have to be in at least one standard button seat class to show their enrollment in the district. Again, this was something designed around the idea of a standard school year, not a pandemic year. So this is another way in which you may find that independent study is more limiting than you may want, because you are going to have students in one button seat class in order to give them independent study courses.
Real quickly, Rob, could you use a distance learning course as that button seat class?
I believe you can, yes, but I will confirm that, and then we can send it out. If there's any change in that, we can send it out with the packets after the fact. Keep in mind that, one last thing before we go on. When you're entering these types of courses into the student schedule, a lot of people may think, well, we'll just call this an independent study course and not worry about it. It's just called independent study. You need to make sure that the course subject is specifically listed in the entry in the student schedule so your auditor knows what the student is learning. So you can't just say dual enrollment or independent study or virtual learning. You have to actually list the title of the course in the student management system. Thanks.
Rob, with that said, what about the opposite? If you have a course that you offer face-to-face and it will also the exact same contents available independent or through virtual, do you have to denote on the transcript what the setting was or the approach, or can you just list that course?
As far as the transcript is concerned, assuming you are giving the student the same credit towards graduation for a virtual course or an independent study course that you would for a standard button seat course, it's Algebra 1, whether it's virtual or independent study or button seat. The transcript wouldn't necessarily need to show anything any different because they're receiving the same credit towards graduation. However, the student, you're going to need some way to be able to show for your auditors which courses are virtual, which courses are independent study, which classes are traditional button seat. You may be able to designate a particular section code if you've got an individual course that you're teaching both ways, or you may end up creating separate course codes. Here's Algebra 1 traditional, here's Algebra 1 virtual. There's a number of ways you can handle it based on the capabilities of your particular student information system.
Does every class have to be listed in your local catalog, Rob? Or what if you're using an MVU class and it's listed in the statewide catalog?
What you can do is, if you're using MVU or you're using Genesee ISD or some other like Edgenuity or somebody like that, you can include in your course catalog a statement that your Board of Education has approved the entire MVU course catalog as courses appropriate for your students to take. But the minute they start saying everything but this and this, then you're back to recording individual courses in it.
Okay.
Let's see, we are still talking independent study courses here. There is not an attendance requirement for independent study. The student does need to be able to communicate with the teacher of record who's providing them guidance in the course, obviously. And they have to be enrolled in the course on count day. Beyond that, your auditor is not going to be looking for anything more than that in order to claim FTE.
So if you can use an independent study option, if you can find a way to make that work, the record-keeping requirements for that course are pretty minimal compared to some of the other options you've been looking at, right?
Yes.
Right. Pupil Accounting Manual A and administrative rules this time. No state law on this one. The reason I want to draw attention to administrative rules is we've been getting questions, what about this bill, or could the governor waive that? Anything that's in administrative rules is up to the Department of Ed to change. It doesn't have to go through the legislature or be signed by the governor. So it's possible that some of the requirements, for example, some of the limitations on independent study could be changed by the department, but as of right now, they still all remain in place. Given that, though, I wanted to make sure you guys were up to speed with what's going on with independent study in case you decide to try and use that option for next year.
Okay, getting tight on time here, so I need to accelerate a little bit. Our next topic is seat time waivers. Again, the thing to keep in mind for seat time waivers is they are not a way to get a shorter day or a shorter year. A seat time waiver is to allow students to learn in some sort of project-based environment outside of the standard school day. So this is a kid who's doing some sort of robotic project or being involved in FIRST Robotics or something, and you want them to be able to get credit for that when it occurs outside of the normal class day. There's currently only about half a dozen districts that currently use seat time waivers across the state. It doesn't lower the days and hours requirement. It just gives the opportunity for the student to learn outside the class day. So for the purposes of this discussion, a seat time waiver isn't the waiver you're probably going to want. What you're going to want is the days and hours waiver. This is for alternative ed programs or innovative programs that allow you to have fewer days or hours than full time. Alternative ed, obviously, but innovative programs, keep in mind, well, when this was designed, obviously pandemics weren't being thought about, but I would have to argue that trying to figure out how to educate your students in the midst of a pandemic requires some innovation. So this might be something that you can make a legitimate argument to the department on. This is a waiver that has to be approved before the school year begins. Question out on the line about whether the 2021 waiver is available. I'm sorry, I don't know. I'll double check on that. And if it is available, Bob, I'll get you a link that we can include with the packet that's going out to everybody.
Right.
It's not the same as the seat time waiver, so make sure you use the right waiver. And I double checked this several times. You can waive up to 80% of the days and hours requirement using a seat time or using a days and hours waiver. I almost did it myself. So you could go down to having a school year as short as 36 days and 219.6 hours under a days and hours waiver. Now, you'd have to make a legitimate argument on how you're going to get a kid a full year's worth of education in that amount of time. But if you can do that, there's nothing that's going to stop them just based on having 80% of the days and hours requirements waived. Teacher of record, same as everything else, so we can just slide past that one. I know we're running short on time. The waiver has to be approved each year. There are some multiple year waivers, and it may be possible that they'll change that to a multi-year waiver, but at the moment I believe it is required to be every year. You do have to take attendance, because even though your days and hours requirement is lower, it is still button seat classes. You have to take attendance in those. Again, if you're developing new courses to do these things, they have to be board approved, count towards either graduation or grade progression for your younger students. And you can't use this to count more FTE for a class than would be taught in a traditional setting. So in a typical 6-period high school, a single hour typically counts for like a 0.16 or a 0.17 FTE. That would be what you would be able to count for a course that's being taught under a days and hours waiver as well, not more than that.
So this would be something, Rob, that you might pursue if you're looking to do a split schedule with students in the building for significantly less time during the year, or some other mechanism. If you're looking to not have to keep track of, say, a virtual learning log or any of the rest of it, if you can get a seat time waiver, I'm sorry, a days and hours waiver, that could get you around some of those recording requirements.
Correct.
Again, our relevant references always include that wonderful pupil accounting manual. For those who are asking, where can you find a days and hours waiver? It's the same section of law as seat time waiver. It's MCL 388.1701, subsection 9. Rob, is there some particular place at the department that folks should reach out to if they're looking for more information or want to start this process?
There is a web page that the department maintains that has all their waivers on it, and I'll make sure you get a link in with everything else.
Excellent.
A few other things we just want to cover real quick here, because you're trying to build flexibility into your schedules. Study halls versus advisory hours. I want to talk real quickly about sequential instruction and talk a little bit about count day. Study halls versus advisory hours. A study hall is kids sitting in a classroom. A certified teacher is in there. Nobody's talking, no instructions being given. You can do that, but you've got to have a schedule that offers at least 1,188 hours of instruction a year. So that's driving your requirements up instead of down. Study halls aren't going to be the way to go here. However, if you have students who have blank periods in their schedule when they're in your classroom, because you're doing half the building is in the classroom Monday, Tuesday, half the building's in the classroom Thursday, Friday, and there's a hole in a particular student's schedule, something like an advisory hour might be something that you can work at. It's been called seminar, achievement hours, names like that. These are students in a room with a certified teacher, and the teacher is actively working with them on homework, study skills, things like that. There's a limitation of 35 students per teacher in that situation, but that does give you the opportunity to cover those students who you may be having difficulty giving a full schedule given the challenges this fall.
Before going forward with that option, for schools that are considering bringing back their students, but in order to socially distance them or to cohort secondary students instead of changing classes, what if their students are assigned to individual classes, but they only report to the seminar full-time and they use the remote, whether it's their LMS or something, to access the content for that classroom? Would that count as an advisory hour towards pupil accounting, or would that be different?
No, that'd be virtual learning. Sequential instruction is a variant of virtual learning, where instead of a student taking all 6 courses at the same time, assuming your Space High School is a 6-hour day, they're only taking 1 or 2 courses at any given point in time. They finish those courses and then they move on to the others when the first one is completed. The student is still required to complete a full academic schedule over the course of the year, but instead of taking 6 courses all year long, they're taking 1 course or 2 courses for the first 6 weeks, 2 more courses for the second 6 weeks, and so on. So on count day, you may end up, if you're using sequential instruction, you may have the student only enrolled in 1 or 2 classes. You can still count that student for full time, but it'll be important that, because they'll have to have an EDP anyways, that as an addendum to that EDP or part of it, if the EDP software allows you to use it, you need to in some way record what that student's full year schedule is intended to be. So they may only be in math and geometry, or in geometry and chemistry over the count period, but the auditor is going to want to see what that full schedule is. Typically, that'll be something that is attached to the EDP for the student. Count Day is the first Wednesday in October this year. It's important that you not start a new program on Count Day. I appreciate everyone is in a mad scramble here. There have been years in the past where we got the rules, the pupil accounting rules that apply to a particular September in December. And I would have to believe that this is, if we end up getting changes, they may well be those kind of changes for this year. We'll have to move forward with the rules as we understand them until somebody tells us what they can be changed to. So this is not the time. Count Day is not a good time to start a new program. You need to have thought through these plans, submitted some information to your pupil accountant, into the auditor before school starts. Again, surprising your auditor when they come in to do your field audit is almost always going to bite you in the butt when you turn around and do that. They're always professional. They absolutely want to help you, but nobody likes being surprised by something in the middle of a very busy day.
Rob, just real quick, there is a requirement right now that you hold school on Count Day. That you actually have said that you actually have school in session on Count Day, correct?
Yes.
And if you're not going to do that, you need a waiver from the department to not do that. If, for example, something happens, power's out, or the apocalypse has happened, you make sure you get your apocalypse waiver ready just in case, right?
That does not apply to forgiven days. If the power's out, then the next day becomes the count day, or the next day you're able to have school. If it's like we're talking the February count and the big massive storm comes through and you aren't able to get school started until next Monday, then that Monday becomes the count day. But you have to schedule school on count day. If you have a year-round schedule and you just decide that the first Wednesday in October is a good day to give the kids a break and staff can do some training together, think again. You have to have school scheduled for count day.
All right, Rob, we've got a ton of questions and about 3 minutes to rock through them. So let's do this. Let's do this fast, hard. I want to go back over teacher of record. Getting a lot of questions on teacher of record, whether Edgenuity or Lincoln Learning Solutions or any of the other providers can count as teacher of record. What we went through at the beginning of this was there are basically two buckets for teacher of record. If it's a virtual course and it's a Michigan virtual course, they can provide you a teacher of record. If it's any other third-party provider, including another district in the state, you have to provide a teacher of record who is employed at your district. Do I have that right?
You do.
Okay. If you're providing the course yourself and your teacher's teaching it, obviously you've provided your own teacher of record for that course, which is kind of the third option on virtual learning.
Right.
Good Lord. A lot of teacher record questions. What else do I have here? Oh, blending different modalities of learning. So if I have a course that is partially in person with 1 day a week of online distance learning where I'm doing like a Zoom class, and then I have 2 days a week that are virtual, and I'm mixing all of those together. The rule here is that you've got to make sure you're following the pupil accounting rules for each of the different modalities, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Am I correct in saying that the basic two buckets we're talking about are if it's live, take attendance. If it's asynchronous, keep a log.
Yes, for the most part, I think that, especially since the primary divisions are going to be virtual learning and button seat learning, I agree. Yeah, things may change a little for independent study, but for the most part, you're right.
All right, guys, I'm scrolling through. We have 17 questions. Real quick, Aaron, I'll jump on yours. Is there a chance the governor could put us in phase 3 and waive all the rules again, or is that not able to be done? It's possible. But I would say that at this point, I think the signals we're getting from the governor's office is that they're hoping for the legislature and MDE to come up with some actual plan for this, not just an executive order that chucks everything out the window like we had the past spring. We've got a little bit more time on that, which is why I think you're seeing the House bill package move, which is why I think you're hearing MDE talk about options. We don't know what that looks like yet. And I guess you could have an EO that chucks everything out the window, but I wouldn't plan on it. Rob, students taking an online course while sitting in a classroom, in a building, with a mentor in the room, if they take attendance while the kid's sitting in there and are the mentor, do you need a virtual log if the kid's just sitting in a room at your school every day?
A mentor cannot take attendance. By law, only a certified teacher can take attendance. So I should preface that. If that mentor is a certified teacher, they could take attendance. But you can only use attendance to certify the class if that class, the course that the student's taking, is more than 50% butt-in-seat time.
Okay.
If it's anything other
Days
than
and hours
that,
waiver for 2021. Rob, can you still file for a days and hours waiver for 2021?
I would have to believe so, yes. I'm not aware of any particular cutoff date, and I'm sure that they're struggling just as much as we are to figure this all out. So I don't think they're going to be harder on the rules as far as when you do things. But as soon as you can is always going to be best.
Do you have any standard forms or anything you would recommend for using an electronic two-way log? It sounds like some folks have been having trouble in the past when they tried to submit electronic documentation for a two-way log.
We have some forms on our website, and again, I will share that same link with you, Bob, that you can give to the audience.
Great.
But again, they're samples. Your auditor may like them, may not, but they're there as a starting point.
All right. I feel like we're out of time. Colin or Ryan or Wendy, do you see any of the other questions in the queue that you guys want to hit before we bring this to a close? If we're taking live attendance in a classroom, Rob, and then we move to phase 3 and everybody has to go online, can we simply switch to two-way interactions once per week if the modality for the course changes partway through the year?
I think so, yes. I don't see any other way for them to allow us to do something like that. And we're in an unprecedented situation here, so that's something that was never anticipated up till now, but that would certainly be how I would suggest anyone approach it.
All right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We've gotten a lot. We will pull all of the unanswered questions and all the questions we did answer and try and put together an FAQ coming out of today. This is a dense and difficult topic with a lot of moving parts. So we appreciate your patience as we're going through this.
Twice you've called me dense today, Bob.
I didn't call you dense, Rob. Called the Pupil Accounting Manual dense. And my skull, that's also dense. The Pupil Accounting Manual, Administrative Rules, Michigan Virtual has a great set of learning continuity resources. We've referenced several things today that we will pull together and share with you as we wrap up this and post our recording and wrap up at the end of today's Leader to Leader. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for future Leader to Leader sessions.